Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start. This is a panel discussion. Again, it's part of, I suppose, our learning from the last day that we had a panel discussion on the Sunday morning, and there were comments at the end that much as that panel discussion was appreciated, there was a feeling that it would be better to have the panel discussion on the Saturday rather than have it on the Sunday and so close to the voting. So that's partly why we've brought this back here today. And I think we have a very interesting panel, and it's a panel with, which will reflect, I think, a wide diversity of views. And starting to my left, Colum McGorman of Amnesty, Conor O'Mahony of UCC, Carl Coulter, former legal editor of the Irish Times, Michael Dwyer of Preserved Marriage, and David Quinn of Iona Institute. And if I may, I might, if I could ask that each of you would perhaps introduce what you wish to say in maybe about 2 minutes, and after that we'll go back to the floor and it will again be a conversation. Could I start maybe with Carol? Carol, as probably all of you know, is the former legal editor of the Irish Times, but she also is the author of a number of books, including a book on family law in the Circuit Court, and she's currently director of the Child Care Law Reporting Project. It's for the first time an independent observer can report on child care cases in the courts. So she does bring, I think, potentially very interesting perspective here. Carol, what do you want to say in 2 minutes?
Okay, I don't know if I'll manage to say it in 2 minutes, but I wanted, first of all, to say, I mean, I'm not advocating a particular vote on the proposal that is before you, but attempting really to raise a couple of questions that I think arise from the discussion so far and around this particular topic. First of all, I think it was the speaker from Marriage Equality said that marriage as a loving commitment has been around for millennia, and actually I don't agree with that. I think marriage and families have taken many different forms down through the years, and the idea of marriage as a loving commitment between two individuals, particularly two equal individuals, is not even accepted today throughout the world. There are many parts of the world where such that emphasis doesn't exist in marriage. So I would like very much to take on from what Charlie Flanagan said, that we are looking at an institution which has evolved historically and which varies widely throughout the world. A major consideration in marriage until recently was the transfer of property and the formation of family alliances. And even in this country, until the last century, that was a consideration, and in rural Ireland a lot of marriages were arranged. My own grandmother's marriage was arranged. She lived to the age of 104, and I never heard her express any dissatisfaction with her life. But that was a reality. If you had a loving, committed relationship, it was a bonus, but it wasn't necessarily the primary consideration. Throughout Europe, really, up to the 18th century, you had self-marriages among the poor to a large degree. Couples united by jumping in one direction over a broomstick and could disunite by jumping in the opposite direction. And a record of births in Wales, for example, kept by a clergyman between the years 1766 and 1799, showed that 60% of the children were born to those kind of informal or semi-formal unions. This was, again, I mean, I don't have time to go into it, but you will find examples of that kind of informality of unions in America and in France and elsewhere in the 19th century. Changed very much in the 18th century. By the 19th century, it did change, and you have great formalization of marriage, particularly in Western Europe and in America, and very wedded to the idea of Christian marriage, which of course meant the man was the head of the family as Christ was head of his church, and women did not have an equal place in those marriages. We have seen a lot of change in the last century to that particular conception. The question was raised as to whether marriage and the family, equate to each other. I think we need to be aware that there are a lot of families, which I think we probably all regard as families, which are not constitutional families here at the moment. That would include grandparents who are rearing children, lone parents rearing children, aunts and uncles perhaps rearing children, foster families rearing children, as well as same-sex couples rearing children. So there are a wide variety of groups of what Jimmy Sheehan described as intimate units which do not have constitutional recognition, and that's perhaps something that we should think about. Central to all of this, of course, is the question of the welfare of children. And well, first I want to make the point that lots of marriages have constitutional recognition with no children. I mean, if a couple who are beyond childbearing years choose to marry, nobody suggests that is not a valid marriage, and it is a constitutional family, even though there is no possibility of children in such a family. And I think if same-sex marriage was seen as something where there wasn't the possibility of children, it might be less controversial. When we come, though, to consider the welfare of children, there are a number of issues, particularly emerging from modern knowledge of child development and international law, which need to be borne in mind. We have far better knowledge today of child development than at any previous time, and we understand the importance of stability, which has been emphasised, and a loving and caring environment for children. We also understand the importance of identity and knowledge of origins. We know the importance of attachment to primary carers, to the healthy mental development of children. We know from the testimonies of Irish children who were exported to the United States for adoption in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, or Aboriginal children taken from their communities and adopted in Canada and Australia, that this separation from their origins was very traumatic and caused permanent damage. Various international conventions stress the importance of children's rights to a link to their origins, to an identity, and to the care of their parents. The Hague Convention on Intercountry Adoption, for instance, emphasises the importance of adoption within the child's culture being first explored before there's intercountry adoption, as well as ensuring the consent to the adoption is free and informed. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child includes the right of the child to his own name and identity, or to be raised by his and her parents where possible, and to have a relationship with both parents. There's been very little discussion of the implications of this convention for the rights of children born through sperm donation or born through surrogacy. But I think that these questions actually are real. They're not only an issue for same-sex couples, of course, but they are among the ways that same-sex couples seek to form families. And I think the question of genetic inheritance of children born in this way, their right to knowledge of, and in some circumstances contact with their biological parents, it does require serious consideration. It's not something that we can just elide and pretend is going to go away. A couple of years ago, the Irish Supreme Court decided that the sperm donor father of a child born to a woman in a lesbian relationship, and it was a joint decision to have this child, had the right of access to his child, despite the wishes of the lesbian couple. The court did so in the interest of the child. They decided that it was not the issue of the rights of any of the adults involved, and this ruling will have to be taken into account in any consideration of legislating for same-sex families into the future.
Carol, could we, because we have to get...
I think similar issues are raised in surrogacy. We can perhaps return to that in the discussion, because I think that those issues of identity, knowledge of origins do arise. So, and as well as, of course, the issues of exploitation of some of the people who might be involved. So therefore, we are being asked to look at very complex issues, and I think that they do deserve to be discussed very seriously, and I leave it to other people perhaps to come back on them.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I maybe move then to David at the other end of the table there, and then I'll go through them. David.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. There's been much discussion about that equality trumps the idea of traditional marriage, which of course it does. But the discussion really has to be partly centred around the meaning of the word equality, because of course what the word equality means is you treat like situations alike, but you're also allowed, obviously, and of necessity and logically, to treat different situations and distinct situations in a distinct way. And so the question is there something distinct about the relationship of a man and a woman that justifies treating that kind of a relationship distinctly? And if there is, then there is nothing discriminatory and there is no breach of equality to treat that distinct thing distinctly. So, I mean, there's no question that treating something distinctly is not a breach of the principle of equality. And so the question then becomes, is there something distinct about the relationship of a man and a woman that justifies treating this thing distinctly? And so the question really has to be, is there something distinct about this? Is there something distinct about the union of a man and a woman that justifies distinct treatment? Now, despite all the changes that have taken place down all the centuries and all the cultures that the shape and makeup and rights and so on that attach to marriage, what has always been at the heart of marriage, always has been this distinctiveness of the sexes, always a man and always a woman. And is this just something accidental and arbitrary, a product of prejudice, or is it actually something that makes sense? Is there something complementary about the role of the sexes, in particular as mothers and fathers, that they bring to the rearing of children? And is there something important about the natural tie to a child and its natural parents? I mean, we know that adopted children frequently go looking for their natural parents. And of course, the adopted parents or adoptive parents can love their children very much and raise them very well. Nonetheless, the children still frequently go looking for their natural parents. So in all of this discussion has to be absolutely at the centre of it, is there something distinctive about the relationship of a man and a woman that justifies having a distinct social institution built around it, and that therefore does not violate the principle of equality? And this isn't a kind of all or nothing thing. I mean, for example, I supported decriminalisation of homosexual acts back in 1993. I supported partnership rights when I first began writing a column around that time. I support adoption by same-sex couples under particular circumstances. I mean, I think there was somebody here said, much better to be given a loving home than to be left in an orphanage. There's absolutely no question about that. And all of these can be taken into account by changes to law. But these can be done without us saying that there is nothing distinctive about the complementary roles of men and women and mothers and fathers, particularly as regards children. So do we still believe that there are important and complementary differences between mothers and fathers that they bring to children? And do we believe also that the natural tie is an important thing to preserve? Because obviously in any same-sex relationship where there's children, there's a biological parent out there somewhere. Now, to what extent should the tie with that biological parent be preserved, or should it be ignored completely? And to what extent does that preserve the equal rights of a child to be raised where possible by their mother and father? Because I mean, you can also look at this from a slightly different point of view, which is that is a child's right to equality violated by the natural ties being deliberately broken? Now, obviously, the natural ties will get broken through circumstance quite frequently, and there's nothing can be done about that. But to actually deliberately set out in law, and with the support of law, to break the natural tie is an extraordinarily radical step to take. So what I'm saying is, just to consider, is there something distinct about the male-female union that is worth preserving and upholding and celebrating in a distinct social institution? And you see this, curiously and ironically, we're told to celebrate difference, but we're being also told to ignore the differences between men and women and mothers and fathers and not preserve it and uphold it and celebrate it in a distinct and unique social institution. So what I'm saying is, let's celebrate that difference and let's continue to recognise the distinct and complementary roles in life of men and women and mothers and fathers.
Okay. Thanks, David. I'd like to ask Conor O'Mahony from the Law Faculty of UCC to be next.
Thank you. When we talk about the nature of legal equality, David argues that it is acceptable to treat different situations differently. And that is half true, but it's only half the truth. If every difference grounded every difference of legal treatment, well, then the law could treat people differently because they are of a different gender. It could treat men and women differently, or the elderly differently from the middle-aged, or the disabled differently from the fully abled. And of course, we know it's not that simple. It's a basic principle of legal equality that where a law treats people differently, that law must be fit for the purpose that it is intended, which means it must pursue a legitimate policy goal and it must actually further that goal, which is the key point. Now, on this issue, I think the first leg of that test, there's no question that the prohibition of same-sex marriage passes that test, that it seeks to pursue the legitimate goals of preserving and protecting the institution of marriage and protecting the welfare of children. Those are obviously worthwhile and legitimate policy goals. But you have to ask yourself, does it satisfy the second limb of the test? Is it fit for those purposes? Does it actually further those legitimate goals? And I would argue that it does not. When we talk about protecting the institution of marriage, it was asked earlier, what would the legal impact be on opposite-sex married couples if we allow same-sex couples to marry? And I would say there'd be no impact. And I say that as a lecturer in constitutional and family law and as a married man. My status before the law, if same-sex couples are allowed to marry, will be exactly the same as it is now. And as regards protecting the welfare of children, well, we heard the sociological data this morning, and obviously there's some argument about that. Even if you weren't convinced by the evidence that was put across this morning, and if you retain concerns about the welfare of children being raised by same-sex parents, the question I would ask you to reflect on is whether or not prohibiting same-sex marriage actually prevents children from being raised by same-sex parents. And we saw clearly in the session earlier on that it does not. So if we talk about whether or not the law in question furthers the policy goals which are claimed for it, I would argue it does not further those policy goals. It is not fit for the purpose it is intended. If you bought a product in a shop and it wasn't fit for the purpose it was intended, you would send it back. And I would argue we should do the same thing here. Thank you.
Thanks, Conor. Could I go now to Michael Dwyer from Preserve Marriage? Michael.
Thank you. I was 24 years old before the state decided it wouldn't send me to prison if I was going to make love to my boyfriend. So, as someone coming from that perspective, I am rather hot on the idea of being treated equally and with equity by the law and by society. I'm here, basically I'm the man in the back of the Clapham omnibus. I'm not an expert, I'm just a citizen. Citizen who happens to be gay and happens not to be religious. This shouldn't be important, but in this debate it seems to have become so. In fact, I'm rather concerned that we're now in a debate rather than a discussion. And I would like this to be the beginning of a discussion, because I think we're talking about two things here that we all want to achieve. And we're talking about it as if it's a dichotomy. We have one thing or the other. We have equity or we have family. And I think I would like this to be the beginning of a discussion where we can respectfully talk to each other and see if there is a way we can achieve genuine equity and equality in law for all of our citizens. But at the same time, I do have a central concern. Maybe my concern is unfounded, but I have yet to be convinced of that. My concern is this, that there is one form of family, if you like, which is, we call it another traditional form, which is the biological parents married in a continuous and intact relationship. And this is the type of family where children flourish best. I am absolutely not here to demonize, criticize, in any way denigrate the efforts of people all around this country who are in a great variety and diversity of families because of internal and external pressures that exist today. Families that are led by mothers and grandmothers, families that are single mothers, single fathers, adoptive families, gay. There are certainly families, there have always been gay parents. There have always been gay mothers and gay fathers. In the past, they may have not wanted to, been able to admit to their sexuality. They've got married into what we call, if you like, straight marriage. There's no reason to believe that these people aren't perfectly good parents. But there is one institution, and all of the evidence, all of the sociological evidence, we're talking about sample sizes of 20,000, 35,000, tells us that the best place to help and flourish children further and achieve the best outcomes is to be brought up by their biological parent in an intact continuous marriage. And if we're going to change the law, and if we're going to change the Constitution, then presumably we're going to change the course of our social policy and what we want to achieve in social policy. And it seems to me that if we are going to change, we have to look not at what we would like to be the case, but what is the case. What is the best outcome, not for adults, but for children. Marriage is not simply, or indeed principally, in my opinion, a romantic statement, a public statement of love and commitment between two people, between two adults. It is an institution which has evolved socially for the protection and flourishing of children. And we can do everything we can to ensure equality for all of our citizens. But let's not do it at the expense of pretending that out of all of the various ways and types of families that we have, that there is one which is the one which the state should be able to privilege, should be able to regard as the aspirational form of family, the ideal, the counsel of perfection, and that the state should be able to be in a position, whether through the tax code or whether through social policy, to support that and regard that as an ideal outcome, while at the same time supporting and valuing and helping every family as they struggle to do their very best for their children.
Okay.
Parents love their children. It doesn't matter whether you're gay or straight, you love your kids, you want the best for them. But let's recognise the best place for them.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but Carl, before going back to you at Colum, would you like to intervene?
It's hard to know where to start at this point in the conversation, but there's a few issues I should make clear. First of all, I'm here as a representative of Amnesty International, and to state very clearly our global policy on marriage equality for same-sex couples. Amnesty International globally calls upon states to end discrimination in civil marriage laws based on either sexual orientation or gender identity. We do so because discrimination is not an option. It's not an optional, non-discrimination is not an optional add-on to any functional republic, to any functional democracy. It's a bottom line, it's a minimum standard. Non-discrimination is a minimum standard in international human rights law. And I'd like to support what Conor said in relation to David's assertion that it's not discriminatory to treat different situations differently. Again, he left off the crucial part of that sentence. It's not discriminatory to treat different situations differently, providing there is an objective reason for doing so. We celebrate difference by recognising difference, by accommodating difference, but not by punishing difference or by excluding difference, people who are different in some form from the same rights protections and regard as others. Carl raised, and again it's come up as a regular theme in this debate generally, and I presume beyond just your conversation here today, questions that really arise around adoption and assisted reproduction. Those are pressing social policy questions. Those are the kinds of questions that we need our legislators to resolve, and they need to resolve them urgently. They are neither unique to, nor in any way defining of, the issue that's before you. Whether or not same-sex couples should be granted full equality before the law and granted the right to marry. Let's, if I can, deal very quickly with the question of parenting in the social sciences. I mean, ask a social scientist one question, you'll find 6 that will tell you a different answer 5 minutes later. And nevertheless, when you look at all of that, and the data is somewhat limited, and I know you heard this morning, but when you look at all of the data that's been presented, there is no compelling data that suggests there are negative or less better outcomes for children who are parented by same-sex couples. That's a simple reality, and I think you had that reinforced this morning. Equally, one other point that I thought was compelling from the expert evidence this morning was that you're considering the constitutional definition of marriage here. And you're being asked to consider whether or not we should change the Constitution in a way that would fundamentally alter, in the view of those who oppose this measure, the definition of marriage on the basis that marriage is all about children. Well, this morning you heard that actually under Irish constitutional law, marriage is not all about children. A family under Irish constitutional law is a married couple with or without children. And I think that's a really important marker for your considerations. Issues relating to children need to be considered not from the perspective of adults, but from the perspective of children. And I absolutely support, at an individual level, and as Amnesty International, we very much support the view that we have to consider issues around identity, around genetic history, around the right of a child to know who they are, around respecting and understanding their cultural diversity as part of that question when we make decisions around children's care. In this country, it's the Irish, it's social workers who decide whether or not people are fit to adopt. It's really important to understand that in Ireland, lesbian and gay people can't just parent through some biological arrangement, whether it be through the normal biological arrangement that might happen in a different relationship, or whether it be through some form of assisted human reproduction. Same-sex people in this Ireland parent by applying to adopt. And today in Ireland, lesbian and gay individuals are being assessed and approved for adoption. What's remarkably different for them vis-a-vis married couples who apply to adopt is that their relationship, their de facto family situation will be considered as part of that assessment. But when the state then sanctions the adoption of the child that will become the child of this family, that child will only have a legal relationship with one of its parents. So by design, under our current situation, this state, this republic, sanctions the adoption of children who it then refuses to provide family security to. That is not child-centred. That is not child-focused. That is not good social policy. And that is not good human rights practice. So if we're going to address questions in relation to adoption, we need to address those questions. But denying same-sex couples access to marriage is not just a denial of their rights. It absolutely perpetuates the denial of the rights of children who they will parent and provide for and love.
Thanks, Colum. I know I was a bit lenient in terms of time in those introductions. None of those were 2 minutes, but I mean, they were substantial, each statement. And Carl, did you want to make a very quick comment, because I saw you trying to get in? I do want to get back to the floor.
I would just like to say that we already have, as we know, privileged the married family in our constitution. That has not exactly provided perfect protection for children in Irish society so far. There have been horrendous examples of children being abused and even murdered within married families. So it does not automatically create perfection. Secondly, I just want to make a point that the major indicator of misery and developmental delay and all of those things for children is not actually the marital status of their parents, it is poverty. And those issues can't in themselves, they can't be wished away, and they can't be solved by a constitutional question. So we should see all of this in a broader social context.
Okay. No, I'm actually going to, because I mean, I want to make, thanks, Carol. Yeah. No, given the extreme shortage of time.
Can I just very quickly?
Yeah, you're all going to get back in at the end, all of you. But I do want to go to the audience, and I will take people who haven't spoken before today as a preference. The first such person is Maureen O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Maureen O'Sullivan. And my question is towards Conor. I was very interested in the submission that the group made from UCC. And you're making the points that in both the preamble to the Constitution and our Constitution, it's based on equality and the freedom and dignity of each individual. And I think you made the point that Articles 41 and 42 could be applied to same-sex couples. So in the submission, you were going through the way in which it has been interpreted in the court as meaning opposite-sex couples. And I'm just wondering, have you any insight or anything further you'd like to add on that as to why that has happened? And you make the point in the submission as well that it's a political matter rather than a legal matter. So I'd be interested in your opinion on that. Thank you.
You're going to hold those. We're going to take any comments from the floor, and in your final wrap-up, you'll each say what you want to say, plus respond to questions. Over there, Jerry Buttimer.
Jerry Buttimer. Could I ask both Conor and Carol, in the context of safeguarding children's rights, in the context of the genetic identity, could the rights of a child to know its genetic parents and to contact them, can that be preserved or put into legislation? And if so, has it been done in any other jurisdiction? And secondly, could I ask the panel, and in particular David, and I want to thank David for his support of the decriminalisation of homosexual acts. As a gay man, I welcome your movement towards me in that regard. Not that way, no. It is very important, David, that I, as a gay person, born, given the gift by the God that I pray to, the God that I believe to, the God that I worship. And in my life, my religion and my faith is very important. Today, and this issue is distinct from that. And the God that I worship and believe and pray to is the God that Bishop Riley this morning quoted, where he said, to love another person is to see the face of God. Because in my partner, I see the love, the commitment, and the union of two people, which to me is at the heart of marriage. My mum and dad, for 40-odd years before my mum died, it was a union of love, of commitment, and they taught me values that I haven't seen repeated, that I see repeated every day by gay people and by straight people, of love, commitment, fidelity. And my question to you is, surely the love and commitment that I have as a gay man to my partner can be replicated in marriage, which is about a commitment and partnership. Gramargaret.
Thank you. Could I go back there? Michael. Sorry, Michael. Yeah. Adon. Sorry, Adon.
Am I okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Aon Avedon. Thanks very much to all the presentations. I really enjoyed today. I'm beginning to think before I got married I should have become a constitutional lawyer first, because I didn't realise what I was getting myself in for. Can I just on the point that Cara made there very briefly about the key determinants about the happiness of children and security of children in any family about being poverty. And I want to agree with that. I just want to ask the panel, particularly in relation to the UCD study from the School of Applied Social Sciences that said, in terms of family relationships and family well-being, that the key determinants in relation to children and their well-being and their advancement in society is actually the education of the parents and nothing to do with the family structure, be it lone parent, be it gay parentage, be it married parentage or whatever. And I think the scaremongering in relation to how happy children might be in any sort of relationship, I think needs to be put to bed, because I think the key determinant is love and it's family security and not the nature of that family.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone who wants to speak but who hasn't yet spoken today? Because I do want to, again, in the principle of equality of voice. Okay. I think you spoke already today, didn't you? Sorry. Sorry, Finbar.
Thanks. Finbar O'Brien. I'm going to go off small bit off now. I think the biggest problem with people is ignorance. You know, they don't know enough, because it's a thing that happened to me personally years ago. I was abused, and automatically from there on, any gay person I came across I categorised him as the same as the abuser, which meant that I didn't have enough knowledge, I didn't know, and I think there's an awful lot more people in the country that are in the same boat as I was, and I kept that up until I got help and I got educated, and then I found out that the gay people, whether they're man or woman or whatever, they're perfect people. There's nothing at all wrong with them. There's just the attitude that I took because I didn't know any different. Mm-hmm. And so I know I'm not asking a question, I'm just putting my own view out on what I think of the lesbians or the gay people. There's nothing at all wrong with them, and they can provide a home as good as any man and woman together.
Thanks, Finbar. Thanks. I'm going to take two more quick comments, if there such be offered, and then we're going back to the panel for the final. Does anyone want? Stephen, I think we'll make it. You have spoken before, but given that no one else was offering.
I appreciate that, Chair. Stephen Agnew. It comes back to the point that Michael Dwyer made, and indeed I think was made by the Bishop earlier. If we accept that the paradigm is the mother, the father, and the child in this system of family is privileged beyond all other children. I speak as somebody who had the disadvantage of growing up with a mother and a stepfather, and as a father of two children whose parents aren't married, who don't receive this paradigm and this privilege. But But if it is the case, and I don't accept this, but it is the case, the research shows this, and I've yet to be pointed to this research. Should we not then afford these children who are otherwise disadvantaged? Why would we seek to privilege the already advantaged with extra protections of the state, extra privilege? Surely the people we should be most concerned about are the most vulnerable children in our society, and giving them the maximum protection of the state and the maximum support from the state, rather than to seek to privilege the already privileged, if you in effect accept that that is the case that they are.
Thanks, Stephen. And Avril, you again spoke before, but you again, last word on the matter.
I'll be really brief. I just wanted to make a point because I don't think it had been made, and certainly I think marriage is about an awful lot more than children. I think sometimes when we focus on some of the comments earlier on, focus on marriage, procreation and things like that, which are a little bit offensive to those of us who are married and don't have children, and people who can't indeed. But a lot of the debate has been about children. I think there's just one point that I wanted to make, because it's been great, the diversity of groups that we've had here today, but there have been voices that couldn't be facilitated because of time. And I just wanted to make the point that having read ahead of this, and I read all the submissions that came in and the views of different groups, it struck me that all of the big children's rights organisations feel passionately that every child should be treated equally. Groups like the Children's Rights Alliance, the Children's Ombudsman, Barnados are all campaigning for marriage equality because they believe that it's right for children. And I just think when we hear all these spurious arguments that are put out, or biases against families that imply that those children aren't happy, to me the embodiment of that today, and the most powerful presentations for me today, was listening to Claire and Conor, who stood up and spoke on it just at such a personal level, and they were so articulate, and they were such happy young people. And to me, all of this debate comes down to, why on earth would we discriminate against good and happy families? I think we should treat everybody the same. I think it's very, very simple. There's been a load of other issues thrown in over the course of the day about things like assisted human reproduction, all kinds of other issues which equally affect opposite-sex couples. I think we shouldn't be distracted by that, because that's completely separate to the issue that we're looking at. We've been asked one question: are we in favour of marriage or not? Do we believe that all of our citizens should be equal before the law? Do we believe that Conor and Claire deserve the same respect for their family as everybody else?
Now I want to go back to the panel, and I want to take it in reverse order to those. So if you would like Colum to go first, and again, try and pick up any questions directly addressed to you, and whatever final words you want to share with the convention.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and pick up on the general themes, but I suppose one point that I would like to make, because it's constantly said and it's simply not true anymore, marriage is not always contracted between people of the opposite sex. Marriage, David, has not always been traditionally contracted between one man and one woman. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that we should move towards the model of marriage that has been the case in other countries, where marriage indeed might be contracted between one man and several women. That's not a road I'd like us to go down. But increasingly over the last 15 years, marriage is regularly and legally contracted between two people of the same sex in many countries across the world. And do you know what changed? Gay people got married. That's what changed. Their children were protected. Their lives, their relationships and their families were treated with equal regard and respect by their societies, by their communities, and that's what I'd like to see happen in Ireland. I'm going to make a very personal statement now, if that's okay. I'm a man who's married to a man, and I have children. And for lots of reasons over the last 20 years, I've regularly stood up and talked about intimate parts of my life because I believe that it's been important to public discourse in my society. It hasn't always been easy. It's very often challenging. It's very often quite difficult. I'm really tired of doing it. I'm really, really tired of it. Monday morning, I'll get up at 7 o'clock. I'll get my children out of bed. I'll make them their school lunches, and I'll drop them to school, and then I'll come to work. Monday evening, I'll come home. My 16-year-old is doing his junior cert this year. I'll probably kill him because he hasn't done enough study. And I'll listen to my 14-year-old who tells me about all the different stuff that happened because she's in first year in school, and I'll try and make sure I pay enough attention to her. I'll get up the next morning and do the same thing. At the weekend, I'll get up, I'll drop him to Grinds, I'll run her around Gorey because she has better social life than anybody else in the rest of the house, and then I'll try and do the shop and I'll prepare food for the rest of the week. That's my experience as a parent. I hope that their experience of being parent is that they are loved, that they are cared for, that they are cherished. My route to parenthood is unusual. My route to parenthood is possibly even unique. But my children know who they are. They understand their identity. They come from a different cultural background and perspective. Their cultural background and perspective is not just known, it's celebrated and respected and is a crucial part of our family and of our home life. I love my children. And my children love me. And what I would like more than anything else from this republic, from my republic, is that we would be treated with respect and with regard and celebrated on an equal footing with every other parent every other parent and family who in their own flawed, unique way tries to get through their life as best they possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael, would you like to be next? Okay. Thank you.
It was adverted to that when it comes to the safety of children, that the dual biological family is not perfect, and that is certainly true. It is not perfect, and we have lots of people in the country who can recognise that. I would advert to the fact that, for example, in the Canadian police records show that children living with step-parents are 40 times more likely to be abused and 120 times more likely to be killed by living parents than those living with genetic parents. And that was Daly and Wilson, 1985-2001, which is not to say that there is any likelihood or that step-parents are going to do this, merely that there is a much lower incidence of abuse and violence in families where children are being brought up by their both biological parents. As regards the economic issue, the single largest study on social outcomes for children was done with a sample of 35,000 in the United States. And it's reviewed by Susan Brown. And the conclusion was, in contrast, regardless of economic and parental resources, the outcomes of adolescents 12 to 17 years old in cohabiting families are worse than those in two-parent biological married families.
So let families marry.
In two biological parent married families, is the quote. Love, of course, love is important. And if we're talking about the example of adoptive parents, there are numbers of studies which show that adoptive parents are more likely to have computers with their children, more likely to attend religious services, more likely to eat meals with their children, more likely to have cultural activities, sports, game playing, science fairs, projects. Adoptive parents invest more time, energy, love, affection, and money in their children than genetic parents do. In studies done on families where you have a genetic child and an adoptive child, studies have shown that there's actually an investment bias towards the adoptive child, which is a lot of evolutionary sociologists would find surprising. However, the studies that produced that analysis also said, irrespective of the love that was invested, the undoubted, unquestioned love of the parents, the outcomes for adoptive children were not as good as children who were the genetic children brought up by their biological parents. And I really, really want to emphasize this. I am not saying that there is a probability that people in other forms of family structure other than the two-parent married biological thing are likely or probable in any way, shape or form to be the children. I'm simply saying that there is a body of evidence out there which says there is one form which is, from the perspective of the children, from the perspective of socializing children, this model may be more fruitful, more fortuitous, more flourishing for children. And if this is the case, and let's have a discussion about it, let's have a debate, let's look at it, let's take our time and consider the effects that what we're doing has. And if this idea holds water, then let's consider what the effect of that should have on our law and on our social policy. That's all.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Could I go next to I'm sorry?
Sorry, could I ask for a point of clarification?
Yes.
Sorry, this morning. Thank you. Just in relation, I think it's a really important point that Mr. Dwyer has raised. We asked Professor Sheehan this morning at our table in relation to
evidence in relation to abuse of children in same-sex relationships or in heterosexual relationships. And he suggested, if I'm clear in my memory, that there wasn't any evidence to suggest that there was any difference in the level of abuse, either sexual or physical. And
No, I'm not
sorry,
suggesting that.
I'm not clear in what you said, Mr. Dwyer.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm
okay,
saying
if I
that
could
levels.
have a clarification, I'd be grateful.
Sorry, I'm not suggesting that there's a gender issue. In fact, to me, as regards parenting issues, I have no reason to believe. I don't think there's an issue specific. There's an issue around the capacity of gay people to be parents. And if we're talking about the issue of abuse, as I'm referring to here, I'm saying that the incidence of abuse is lower simply in families where where children are being raised by their biological parents in an intact marriage. Nothing to do with gender. I'm not saying that gender is an issue.
That's exactly the point I'm asking, please, for clarification.
Jim, would you like to?
Not what we understood. Thank you, Chair.
Because I mean, this is an important point, and I want to get Jim Sheehan to, and after that we're going to Conor.
Yes, my understanding of the research evidence is that, in fact, there is a different incidence of both sexual abuse and physical abuse amongst step families, where you're talking about heterosexual parents, that where married parents and you have an intact family, male, female, right, and you're comparing those to step families, male, female parents and children, that there is a difference in the level of physical abuse. But of course, that has nothing to do with the issue. Sure, it hasn't really. About same-sex marriage.
No, okay, thank you.
Well,
sorry, I mean, I don't want to. I mean, I think what you have said is very clear, and I mean, I mean that's it. I mean, that's where the evidence is. I think. Conor,
we both agree where the evidence is.
Sorry?
I think we both agree where the evidence is.
Okay,
yeah, that's right.
Conor.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to cite any studies. I'm just going to reiterate my earlier point, which is that if you don't want same-sex couples raising children, well, banning same-sex marriage isn't the way to go about it, because obviously same-sex couples are raising children and will continue to raise children. So it just doesn't achieve that end. So they're two completely separate points. To answer the questions which have been specifically addressed to me, Maureen O'Sullivan asked me about the issue around whether or not there is a need to amend the Constitution and how the existing constitutional provisions could apply to same-sex couples who are married. And I've argued on a number of occasions that on a strict legal interpretation, there's nothing in the Constitution that would be inconsistent with an act of the Oireachtas that would allow same-sex couples to marry. Articles 41 and 42 could apply in a perfectly workable way to them. That's my view. But I would also argue there is a need for an amendment, and the reason for that is that nobody in the Dáil agrees with me. And so, from that point of view, it doesn't matter what I say or what any other academic says. People in the Dáil have repeatedly stood up and say we can't legislate for marriage equality without amending the Constitution first. And ultimately, they're the people who get to do it. And so if they think there needs to be an amendment, then there needs to be an amendment. And that, to my mind, is political reality and pretty much the end of that discussion. To go back then, Jerry Buttimer asked about the question of the right of the child to know his or her genetic parents. That, interestingly, is an issue. It's not regulated in Irish law right now. So currently you have adopted children in Ireland who don't have the right to find out who their genetic parents are. Similarly, children who might be born through sperm donation or other assisted human reproduction methods in Ireland don't have that right at present, irrespective of same-sex marriage. So that is something which we need to address as a more general issue, but could be addressed as part of a scheme of legislative reform. We don't need a constitutional amendment on that. The Supreme Court addressed this issue in 1998, and they said that the reconciliation of constitutional rights in respect of the parent's right to privacy versus the child's right to know their identity, the court said it was up to the Oireachtas to decide how to reconcile those two issues. Should the Oireachtas do that? I think, yes, they should. I think there's a case to be made for reform on that issue. But I think that, again, it's a separate issue to this constitutional amendment. It's an issue which exists whether or not we amend the Constitution to provide for same-sex marriage. So those are the questions specifically addressed to me. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Conor. David.
There's a website called Donor Sibling Registry, and on this website are registered thousands upon thousands of adult children of sperm and egg donation. And they are looking for their natural parents, and they are looking for their half-siblings, and often discover they have hundreds of half siblings but cannot find their natural parents and are wondering why they were deprived of that right. So we just can't say that the natural ties are not important and are not to be valued. And the question is, how do we value the natural ties? How do we say that the natural ties are important? We used to say, up until yesterday, more or less, that we do it through a particular and distinct social institution. And nobody was saying this distinct social institution is discriminating against anyone. What was being said was, this takes into account important realities about human life and human nature. Okay, and it takes very seriously the natural ties. And, you know, when you do sever these deliberately, okay, and when you take no account of the importance of the natural ties, you end up with something like Donor Sibling Registry, or another website called Anonymous RS. Also, lots of these children going looking for their natural parents. And we are now moving into this brave new world where these are being deliberately broken, you know, with the cooperation of the law. Okay, and now we're beginning to see the consequences. Now, unfortunately, none of these people are here today. None of these children are here today. I could have brought somebody, wish I had, called Joanna Rose, who's been campaigning for years for the rights of people like herself, born of a sperm donor. She's now about 40, to know who her natural parent is, her natural father is. There are lots and lots of these people. Okay, and I mean they are insistent that not only their right to know who their genetic parent is should be enshrined in law, but their right to be raised by their genetic parent, which should never be deliberately severed by law, should only be severed by circumstance, okay, never by law. And so we're moving into this world now where the natural tie is treated as though it's of no importance. This is an extremely far-reaching and radical step to take. Now, you might say this has nothing to do with marriage, okay? But it is always up to date, had something to do with marriage, because marriage has always been about the distinctiveness of the two sexes, about the fact that it takes the two sexes to bring a child into being. And of course, it's true that infertile couples can get married. But the marriage of any man and any woman doesn't deny the complementarity and distinctiveness and the distinctive roles of the two sexes. So is this important? And is it important to enshrine it in a particular institution while also recognising the rights of other people? So again, it comes down to treating different situations in different ways. And that is justified if there is something distinct about male-female relationships and about the complementary roles of mothers and fathers. So the decision is, do we say this is not important and doesn't need a particular social institution to embody it? That's the decision before us. Do we think it's distinct? Now, in terms of Jerry's question, any two people can love each other just as much as any other two people. There are many, many, many forms of love. I mean, there was sibling sisters in Britain called the Burton sisters. In their 80s, lived together all their lives, looked after elderly relatives. And they were wondering, why can't we get the benefits of civil partnerships? Because when one of us dies, the other is going to have to sell the house to pay inheritance tax. The only difference between us and a lesbian couple is we're not in a sexual union. But why should the existence of a sexual union be what's required to get certain rights and benefits under law in order to protect a particular relationship? And the answer is none. Okay, so the Burton sisters clearly in that kind of non-sexual union should get rights too. But if there is a reason to treat marriage between a man and a woman distinctly, then we need to keep that distinct institution, okay, while also protecting the rights of other people, whether it be a lesbian couple or whether it be the likes of the Burton sisters. So there's no question that we don't protect people as they need protection and recognise relationships as they need recognition. But if we think that there's something distinct about the roles of men and women and mothers and fathers, then it makes perfect sense to give it a distinct social institution.
Okay, thanks, David. No, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I'm just going to stick to what my proposal was to get the final comment from the panel, and that's Carl Coulter.
Oh, okay. Well, first, I mean, I think it's important to stress that the issues raised around assisted human reproduction are not by any means exclusively matters relating to same-sex marriage. Not at all. They're a challenge that need to be addressed by the legislature urgently. And I think the Commission on Assisted Human Reproduction, which prepared a report 10 years ago, did so in a different context in which some of the issues that I think are there were not actually addressed because thinking has moved on, even in that period. And it would be very important to try to get that out of the way, I think, by legislation. Secondly, privileging marriage in the Constitution, which we do. I mean, that's what we all acknowledge, as the foundation of families. It has not created a perfect environment for children in Ireland. And therefore, the suggestion that somehow by doing that, everything then things are then all right. They're not necessarily all right as a result. No, nor has it prevented children being reared in many other family forms, which don't have constitutional recognition. And I think it is a problem that we have a lot of different family forms in Ireland that don't have constitutional protection, and where children are being reared by people who love them and who care for them with, in many instances, a blood link. There are other types of relatives, grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc., and in some cases without a blood link. So, and finally, I just want to make the point that marriage is not just about children either. It is, in fact, the emphasis that I would argue has only come in very recent years in terms of human history, the emphasis on loving commitment as the centre of marriage. It is actually that emphasis that has created the demand for same-sex marriage. If marriage in the old was, as it has been for thousands and thousands of years, had actually to do with all kinds of other things around property and family alliances and so on, if that were the case, then same-sex couples probably would have no interest in it. It's because modern marriage is based on the idea of loving commitment that same-sex couples care about it. And therefore, the point I was trying to make earlier is the family is an evolving institution, and I don't think we can get away from the notion of a dynamic and evolving institution, and the fact that our constitution doesn't recognise the many kinds of families that exist in Ireland, and by no means are they only same-sex families.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of the panellists here. I know actually we could go on for another half an hour. I know many of you would like to say more, but we are 15 minutes over our time. It's the first time it has happened in the history of the convention that we've run over time on a Saturday evening. So thank you all very much. And my apologies for the length of short distance. I mean, just to bring the day to a conclusion and to say thank you to a number of people. Obviously, thank you to all of the experts who've contributed and the panellists. And I also want a particular thanks to the facilitators and note takers who've been with us all day. It has really been, a privilege to be here today. I think this important issue has been discussed with seriousness and with the proper level of respect and dignity. And, I think it provides the basis for all of the convention members to think overnight, reflect overnight before you come back here in the morning to vote. I'm sure this day has been watched as well by many people outside, and I think as a process of a democratic engagement, this has been a very, I think, positive day. So thank you to all of you for your attention, rapt attention for much of the day. And I hope you've an enjoyable evening, and we see you at dinner. Thank you.